Imagine this for a second. You retire with $1 million invested. Start taking a modest paycheck from your portfolio, and 3 decades later, your family inherits several million more than you ever started with. That sounds like a dream ending, right? The crazy part is that, looking at historical market data, this kind of outcome is not rare. In many scenarios, it is actually the typical result. The real risk for a lot of retirees is not running out of money. The real risk is the opposite challenge, being so afraid of running out that they never truly enjoy their wealth. In this video, I want to show you why the famous 4% rule was designed for absolute worst-case scenarios, and how that built-in safety often leaves people massively underspending for their entire retirement. And I also want to give you a simple, practical framework you can use to safely give yourself raises during retirement. So your money actually funds your life instead of just becoming a giant inheritance. Before we dive in, if you care about building a portfolio that can pay you reliably for the rest of your life, make sure you subscribe to Dave's Dividend Lab and hit the like button right now. Now let's start with the question that keeps people up at night. How much can you really take from your portfolio every year without lying awake wondering whether you are going to outlive your money? Decades ago, researchers took a simple approach. They asked, if I retired at the worst possible moment in market history, what withdrawal rate would have survived 30 tough years without the portfolio ever hitting zero along the way? They looked at brutal starting points, market crashes, long periods of high inflation, entire decades where returns were disappointingly low. They wanted a number that would survive all of that without needing constant tinkering or perfect timing. When they ran those scenarios again and again, the answer that kept showing up was around 4%. That meant withdrawing 4% of your starting balance, then increasing that dollar amount each year with inflation. So if you retire with $1 million, year 1, you'd take $40,000. Year 2, you might bump that up a little to keep pace with rising prices, and so on, all the way through a 30-year retirement. That 4% number became famous as the so-called safe withdrawal rate. But there is one detail most people miss. It was based on the ugliest historical sequences, not on average or typical retirees. In other words, 4% was designed as a floor, not as a ceiling. It answers the question, what would have worked even for the unluckiest retiree, the person who stepped into retirement at the worst possible moment? Here's where the story gets really interesting. When later researchers examined every historical 30-year retirement window, they found something that almost nobody talks about. Most retirees didn't end close to zero. They ended with huge leftover portfolios. When you run the numbers across many different start dates and return paths, the median outcome for someone following the 4% rule is finishing with roughly 2.8 times their starting balance after 3 decades of withdrawals. Think about that. You retire with $1 million. Never increase your withdrawals beyond inflation. And in the typical historical scenario, you die with something around $2.8 million still invested. That is enormous slack in the system. It gets even more extreme in really strong periods. In roughly 1/3 of historical cases, retirees end up with more than 5 times the portfolio they started with, even after taking those inflation-adjusted withdrawals every single year. So if the worst cases define the 4% rule, the typical cases tell a very different story. The story is not barely scraping by. The story is quietly, unintentionally becoming far wealthier throughout retirement than you expected. And that raises a hard but important question. Are you building your retirement plan only to avoid failure? Or are you also intentionally designing it to help you actually enjoy the wealth you worked decades to accumulate? Because if all you ever do is follow the strict 4% rule forever, odds are high that you will never see the full benefit of that money. Instead, a huge chunk may simply pass untouched to your heirs. There is nothing wrong with leaving a legacy. I love the idea of helping the next generation start from a stronger position. But legacy should be a conscious choice, not a side effect of being terrified to spend. So let's make this concrete using 3 fictional retirees. All 3 start with $1 million invested. All 3 want their money to last at least 30 years. But they each take a very different approach to spending that money. First, meet Mark, the rule follower. Mark reads about the 4% rule and decides to treat it as sacred. Year 1, he withdraws $40,000. Every year after that, he He simply adjusts that dollar amount for inflation and repeats. Mark never gives himself a real raise. No matter how high his portfolio climbs, he keeps his lifestyle pegged to that original formula. He feels safe because the rules say he should never run out of money this way. In many historical scenarios, Mark ends up in a surprisingly strong position, financially speaking. After 30 years, he has enjoyed steady income the whole time and still leaves his family with $2, $3, sometimes even $5 million or more. But here's the catch. Mark is the guy who spends years saying no. No to trips he secretly wanted to take. No to experiences with family he could easily afford. No to generosity he always planned to show someday. He protects his account balance perfectly, but never really asks whether he is protecting his quality of life to the same degree. And for a lot of people, that is how unintentional underspending happens. Not by design, but by inertia and fear. Now let's meet Lisa, the Ratcheter. Lisa also starts with the 4% rule. She likes the safety behind it, but she adds one extra step. Every few years, she checks whether her balance has grown after withdrawals and inflation. If her portfolio is still sitting at or above where she started, she gives herself permission to ratchet up spending permanently by 10 to 20%. Instead of $40,000, she might move to $44,000 or even $48,000. Lisa is not reckless. She does not chase giant jumps just because the market had one good year. She uses checkpoints maybe every 3 to 5 years to see whether her wealth has truly moved to a higher, more durable level. If markets are rough and her balance is lower than where she began, she simply stays put at the current spending level. No pay cut, no panic, just patience. The original 4% baseline is still doing its job as a safety net. Over time, this ratcheting approach lets Lisa enjoy more of her upside. In environments where returns are strong, her lifestyle quietly upgrades. Maybe that means more travel, nicer experiences with family, or being more generous while she is still alive. By the time 30 years pass, Lisa's plan still has a very high probability of success based on historical data. But she has squeezed more actual life out of the same starting million than Mark ever allowed himself to experience. Finally, meet Jordan, the big spender. Jordan looks at that million and says, "I only get one shot at retirement. I am comfortable spending 6 or 7% a year as long as I build in serious flexibility and safeguards." Jordan might start by taking $60,000 or $70,000 annually from the portfolio. That is a noticeably bigger lifestyle than Mark or Lisa enjoy on paper. More trips, more upgrades, more generous gifts in those early, more active retirement years. But Jordan also knows the math cuts both ways. A high withdrawal rate is extremely sensitive to early market returns. If the first few years are bad, the portfolio can be damaged quickly. So Jordan uses two important tools to manage risk. First, Jordan keeps a dedicated cash buffer, or very low-risk bucket, with a couple of years of essential expenses. When markets are ugly, withdrawals come from that safe bucket instead of forcing big sales from beaten-down investments. Second, Jordan separates essentials from luxuries. Things like housing, basic food, insurance, and healthcare must be covered no matter what. But travel, fancy cars, home upgrades, and large gifts are treated as flexible levers that can be dialed down. If markets stumble hard in the first decade, Jordan is prepared to pause major trips, drive the current car a little longer, and postpone non-critical projects until the portfolio heals. That flexibility keeps the plan from snapping under pressure. So which of these three approaches is best? There is no universal right answer. It depends on what you value most: maximum security, maximum lifestyle, or a middle path that starts conservative but rewards you when things go well. What I want you to notice, though, is that all three strategies still revolve around the same core idea. That original 4% rule is a powerful baseline for safety, but it is often just the starting point, not the final destination. This is where I like to introduce what I call the Spend Your Upside framework. It is a simple way to honor the safety of 4% while giving yourself permission to enjoy more if markets actually cooperate with you. Here's how it works. Step 1. You start retirement with a reasonable withdrawal rate, often around that 4% mark, and you commit to updating the dollar amount each year for inflation so your spending keeps its purchasing power. Step 2. You set predetermined checkpoints, maybe every 3 or 5 years. At each checkpoint, you compare your current portfolio value with the amount you started retirement with after accounting for the withdrawals you have already taken. If your balance is below your starting point, that is your signal to hold steady. Do not give yourself a raise, but also do not panic. The original plan was built with bad stretches in mind. You are still within the safety envelope. If your balance is at or above your starting level, that is your green light. You have survived those early years, taken income every year, and your wealth is still intact or even higher. You can now safely ratchet your spending upward. The raise does not have to be huge. Think in the range of 10 to 20% more than your current withdrawal. If you were taking $40,000, maybe you move to $44,000 or $48,000 and lock that in going forward. That part is really important. Under this framework, the raise is permanent. You do not have to cut it later just because markets turn choppy. You are essentially harvesting some of the upside and baking it permanently into your lifestyle. By repeating this process every few years, long retirements with strong returns naturally translate into higher living standards instead of just bigger account balances for your heirs. You are intentionally spending your upside instead of hoarding it. Now, there is another lever that can dramatically improve your odds without requiring massive sacrifices. That lever is flexibility. Retirement is not meant to be a rigid contract. It works far better as a flexible plan with clear boundaries. I like to ask 3 simple questions to test how flexible someone really is. First, could you temporarily cut discretionary spending if markets crashed hard in your first few years of retirement, even if that feels uncomfortable in the moment? For example, could you skip an expensive international trip, choose a cheaper vacation, or delay a major home renovation for a couple of years while your portfolio recovers? Those choices can seriously change the math in your favor. Second question, are you willing to pause inflation raises in bad years? Instead of automatically giving yourself a pay bump every year, you might hold your spending flat when markets are negative, so withdrawals do not climb while assets are struggling. Third, can you clearly separate absolute essentials from nice-to-haves? Essentials are the bills that must be paid no matter what. Nice-to-haves are the extras you can trim temporarily without destroying your quality of life forever. Here is the good news. You do not have to answer yes to all 3 questions to build a resilient plan. Even being flexible in just one of those areas can dramatically increase the robustness of your retirement withdrawals over time. Flexibility acts like a shock absorber in your financial life. It does not stop the bumps from happening, but it spreads out the impact so your plan does not crack when markets inevitably throw a rough patch at you. Up to this point, we have focused a lot on the upside, finishing with twice, 3 times, sometimes even 5 times your starting wealth. But we should pause and talk about what that really means for your life and your legacy. A starting balance of $1 million effectively becomes a baseline inheritance amount in many historical scenarios. Remember, in the vast majority of cases, following a conservative rule left retirees with at least as much as they began with, often far more. So the question becomes less, will I run out of money, and more, am I unintentionally building a multi-million-dollar gift I never planned to give, simply because I was always too scared to increase my spending when it was actually safe? Again, this is not about shaming anyone who wants to leave a large legacy. That can be an amazing goal. Funding education for grandkids, supporting causes you care deeply about, or helping family achieve financial freedom sooner are all beautiful outcomes. The point is alignment. Does your current plan match your real values? Or are you clinging to every dollar out of fear, even though the data shows that the real danger might be chronic underspending, not catastrophic depletion? I also want to be fair to the numbers here. Historical results are not guarantees. The future could deliver lower returns or longer periods of stagnation than anything we have seen. We simply do not know what the next 30 years look like. On top of that, inflation quietly erodes your purchasing power. $1 million today is not the same as $1 million 3 decades from now. Nominal dollar amounts can sound impressive while buying far less in real-world terms. There is also sequence of returns risk. If your retirement starts right before a major crash or a decade of poor returns, the impact on your portfolio can be far worse than if those bad years hit much later in your journey. That is exactly why the original researchers anchored on worst-case historical sequences when they proposed 4%. They wanted something that held up even when the timing was awful, not just when markets were friendly and smooth. But here's the encouraging part. When you combine a conservative starting point, a framework like spend your upside to capture gains, and even a small amount of flexibility in tough years, you dramatically tilt the odds in your favor. You give yourself a plan that is built to handle storms without freezing you into a tiny lifestyle forever. You create room to both protect your future self and fully enjoy more of your money while you are healthy and active. So now I want you to picture your own retirement for a moment. If you kept doing exactly what you were planning today, are you more likely to run out of money or to leave a surprisingly large pile behind without really meaning to? Are you living with constant anxiety about every market headline, or are you leaving lifestyle on the table because you never built a clear, data-driven way to give yourself permission to spend a bit more when things are going well? If this is resonating with you, here is your homework. Sketch out your current withdrawal plan on paper. Write down your starting balance, your planned withdrawal rate, and whether you have any rules for increasing or decreasing spending over time. Then, add to pieces. First, choose your checkpoints. Every 3 or 5 years, commit to comparing your portfolio value against your starting point. Second, decide in advance what small, permanent raise you will give yourself if you are ahead. So, let me ask you directly, do you want your story to be retire with $1 million and quietly leave $5 million behind by accident? Or retire with $1 million and use the data to design a life you truly enjoy? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Are you more like Mark, the rule follower, Lisa the Ratcheter, or Jordan the big spender? I read through your comments and they help me decide what to cover next on this channel. If you got value from this breakdown on the 4% rule and spending your upside, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to Dave's Dividend Lab, and ring the bell so you never miss future deep dives. And if you know someone who is terrified of spending in retirement, share this with them. Sometimes seeing the actual data is the nudge they need to build a plan that balances safety, freedom, and legacy in a healthier way. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Remember, your portfolio is not just a number on a screen. It is a tool meant to fund the next chapter of your life. I will see you in the next video.